Nobody trains martial arts. Why am I saying this? Well, that's mainly because there are two conceptions of what martial arts really are. For most people, martial arts, what they call martial arts, is associated to Asian martial arts. That is, they think of karate, jiu-jitsu for the Japanese, maybe kung fu, different kinds of kung fu, Muay Thai, or even Kalaripaya or whatever, some sort of exotic Eastern combat art. But in reality, when you think about it, the term martial arts, what is it? Well, martial comes from Mars, the god of war. So martial arts are all the arts related to war. So really, if you think about it, the only people who practice martial arts today are to be found in the military. And what do they do in the military? Well, there's a vast variety of things that they do. So you could consider that flying a jet plane or operating a drone or being in a submarine, all those tasks could be considered as martial arts, as well as being a general in charge of the strategy, or maybe everything that has to do with the logistics. All these things could be considered as martial arts, in fact. So really, when we say martial arts, most of the time what we mean is not the actual martial arts or the actual tasks that happen in the military or in the context of wars. What we mean usually is some close combat that originates from Asia and that has not really been tested in the battlefield for hundreds of years. Okay, so what's the point of doing that really? I mean, what's the point of learning Asian martial arts, Asian combat that has not been practiced in many, many years? And what's the point of learning art, which are mainly close combat techniques without any weapons? What happens to the European martial arts? Why is it we always think about Eastern Asia and Asian martial arts when we think of martial arts? All right, so in Europe, there are no martial arts per se. I mean, what we have in Europe is HEMA. So HEMA stands for Historical European Martial Arts. So in HEMA, what do? Well, they try to recreate the martial arts of ancient times. So they will study treatises of swordsmanship. They will use swords, sticks, all kinds of weapons. And they will also look into maybe some sort of wrestlings like Glima or Ortepal, which is Glima is the Viking wrestling and Ortepal is the Greek wrestling. So they will look into all these things, but they do not call that martial arts. They see it for what it is. That is a historical combat method that is not used today anymore, because today it's no longer relevant because of the modern weapons that we have. So then the question is, why would you study an art that is Eastern Asian, that does not take into consideration weapons? All right, so the first reason why people take up martial arts is usually for self-defense. So the first thing I would say is, yeah, well, you study self-defense. Okay. If you really want to have effective self-defense, is studying a martial art, which is, as I said, an unarmed close combat method from Asia and from many centuries ago. Why would you choose that for self-defense? I mean, what do they do in the army for self-defense? So first, I imagine self-defense, as we understand it, is usually only when you have no longer your weapon close to you, when no weapon is available. So in terms of self-defense, the only thing you really need is an efficient weapon. Because as soon as you have a weapon, you have such an advantage over someone who doesn't have a weapon that there is no need for any kind of physical combat, close combat, self-defense preparation of any kind. Now you've got a baseball bat, you've got a stick, you've got pepper spray. I mean, even monkeys use sticks. You're better equipped to fight off anyone than with just your bare hands. So why would you spend countless hours studying a style that requires to use just your hands when you can buy pepper spray, or you could get yourself a dog, which are way more efficient? So to me, the argument of I study martial art as a self-defense, or I study martial art for self-defense, it just doesn't hold up. I don't think it works. And so the thing also about self-defense, I mean, I could talk about that for really a long time, because there's a lot to say regarding self-defense. But the scenario of, some guy might come up to you and say something and, try to intimidate you, and that leads to a fight. Okay, that's one situation, but really violence and interactions between humans are way more complex than that. So why would you want to spend hundreds of hours just for preparing just for that thing? Personally, I think it's a waste of time, and time is very important. We don't have so much time on this earth. Do we really want to spend it, or spend a lot of it, studying how to defend oneself in this situation that probably will never happen? And also, this is a situation that you can see coming, and where your life is not that much at stake, in fact. And for every other situation, for most of the other situations, that is, someone is a predator and they want something that you've got, and you're just an obstacle on the way. So they don't see you as a person per se, they just see you as a resource. Well, for these situations, you can't really prepare yourself, because the predator mentality is to attack with minimum risk and maximum efficiency. That is, someone's going to attack you from behind when you don't expect it. So you can have done a lot of self-defense and all these things, that's not really going to make any difference. So personally, once I really, realized that I wasn't doing martial art for self-defense, I pretty much gave up martial arts completely. What I did instead is that I turned to combat sports, and for all those situations where your life is not really at stake and it's all about intimidation that might escalate, I think you're just as well equipped with a good combat sport than you would be with any kind of martial arts, which might create an illusion of efficiency, but really it's a lie. So moving on to the other reason why people take up martial arts, I think one of them has a lot to do with the cinema, with films, and people, particularly people of my generations, we were very much inspired by Jean-Claude Van Damme. Maybe the people who were a bit older than me, it was Bruce Lee, but a lot of people started martial arts because of films. Now, I think the reason for that is that in films there's usually the same sort of story, that is, a guy at first is not very good, he gets his ass kicked, and then he trains very hard, or with a master or whatever, and then he comes back and then he's good again. And I think a lot of guys, maybe not so much women, but a lot of men, a lot of guys, a lot of young guys kind of relate to that, and this idea of being like stronger, beating everybody, the way we become strong. Because in our lives we all have moments when some guys pick on us, they're stronger than us. It doesn't necessarily mean that you got bullied very bad, but I think everybody has this fantasy as a man that you can just kick anybody's ass, and you want to be able to do that. So that's another reason I think why people sort of take up martial arts. So the problem is that this is an archetype, and if you define yourself in that way, and that your martial arts and your training become sort of part of who you are, and that one day it turns out that your martial arts or everything you've been doing turns out to be useless or not as efficient as you thought, or worse, or you get your ass kicked, whatever. The problem is that it's not just your, I would say that your physical body that has been damaged, but it's also your very identity. And instead, there are different things that can happen then. That is, you've been doing your martial art for a long time, you get your ass kicked for some reason in some particular situation, and okay, the logical consequence of that should be, oh well, this martial art was not very useful to me, maybe I should just get a dog and some pepper spray and I'll be better off like that. Unfortunately, the human mind is not really does not really work that way, and there is a principle which is the principle of coherence. And so for a lot of people, it is more difficult to be incoherent than to be illogical. So what could happen is that instead of drawing a conclusion, the natural conclusion, which is, yeah, my martial art is not so good, I should go back to finding some other method to defend myself. No, some people will actually will be in denial. They will say, oh yeah, it didn't work because of that and that, maybe the context, maybe I wasn't good enough, maybe I didn't train enough, da, da, da. But they will not go as far as questioning the method they've been studying, because they've spent energy, money and time in it, and they're not ready to accept that it was just a waste of time, money and energy. So personally, what I did was, because I've always thought about these things, I've always questioned my practices and thought about, yeah, okay, but why am I doing this? I started with some Kung Fu stuff, I did some Capoeira, I did some Wing Chun, and only when I got into combat sport did I really feel that I could really do something, like if someone would attack me. And I thought, before doing that, before doing like combat sport, while I was doing my other practices, I thought I was really badass, particularly doing Wing Chun. I thought I was really a killing machine, or I could become a real killing machine. But that's only when I did combat sport that I realized that how deluded I was. Okay, and so finally, the last reason why people sometimes take up martial art has to do with philosophy or Eastern wisdom and things of that sort. Now, as much as I enjoy Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and Taoism and all these things, I really think that wisdom, philosophy is a separate thing from martial art. Now martial arts, I would say, I'd rather say combat sport rather than martial arts, are a great way to discover oneself, and that's really the way I look at it. But really, if you want to learn to defend yourself, or you want to learn to fight, you don't need to load your mind with philosophical concept. And if you're interested in the philosophical concept, you don't need to learn fighting also. If you think about it, the ancient Greeks, a lot of the philosophers, they were also fighters or wrestlers or things like that, because their idea was you should have a sound mind in a sound body. And today there are still people like that, like for example, Firas Zahabi, the trainer of Georges St-Pierre. He's got a PhD in philosophy, so he's an example of a guy who's really, walk on both legs, that is having an intellectual, philosophical background and very good skills in sports, in combat sports. All right, so to conclude, why do martial arts? Well, if you don't do it for self-defense, okay, because As I said, I don't see martial art as very efficient for self-defense. You don't do it because you want to look like your favorite movie star. You want to be a hero, you want to kick ass. You don't do it because you want to learn the philosophy and the wisdom that is attached to it. And then what's left? Well, you do it then for the joy of sparring fighting, if by any chance in your martial art practice there is something like that. Alright, well then, just do combat sport. I mean, personally, that's the conclusion I got to. That is, I found more in combat sports than I found in martial arts. Alright, more on that in my next video.